Welcome back to the Microshift Project Podcast, where we talk about the moments that change everything in your life. Not the overnight transformations or viral success stories, the quiet microshifts. The moments that seem small at the time, but end up changing your trajectory completely. I'm your host, Nick Valinchak. That's Nicky V if you're nasty. And today's guest is someone who embodies that exact philosophy. I'm going to give bonus points for the first person who gets the reference to Nicky V if you're nasty. Do you get the reference?
I get the reference.
What is it?
It's your buddy, the great wrestler that is just a huge personality, and that's you, my friend.
All right. Well, we're close, but it is actually not. I will give a hint. It is a famous 80s, 90s R&B singer that did, I don't know, I think it was she did an entire album. I'm just going to tell you it's Janet Jackson.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's Miss Jackson if you're nasty. So I kind of still, I'm into stealing things. I don't know. Maybe it's the old addict in me.
Okay.
We have Mark Dolan. He is the founder of Time Tested Mastery Life Lessons Sell. He's a coach, communicator, and teacher whose work blends decades, I won't say how many, we don't want to age shame people on this show, of experience in leadership, real estate, which I hear is one of the easiest things to do, and personal development. His message is simple but powerful. Mastery isn't found in shortcuts. It's built through daily, deliberate practice. I was lucky enough to see him deliver this message firsthand, and I knew that we had to keep the relationship going and keep in communication. Mark, welcome to the Microshift Project Podcast. Great to have you.
Well, thank you, Nick. It is a pleasure to be invited on your show and to talk with the people that you're working with. I really enjoyed the opportunity that we spent together up in Boston at MIT speaking and got to know you a little bit. So I feel like we're kindred spirits, and it's a joy to share my message with you guys today.
I think the experience in Boston is kind of the perfect embodiment of why we are both doing what we're doing. At least that's the way I felt. When I walked into the room, I had given speeches before. I had spoken in front of it. Sometimes I have already done speeches in front of not thousands, but hundreds of people. I mean, I worked in wrestling, so I was the on-screen owner of the company. I talked in front of the crowd. I did speeches at my university after I graduated and things like that. But this felt different because when I was giving those speeches before, it was a different kind of act. This was something I was so passionate about, and I was a little bit nervous because I am a perfectionist, and it was a really comfortable feeling to walk into the room. And I believe at the time it was just you and Jan who were there. And it was just like, and even as everyone else started arriving, it was just like everybody was in the same place, had the same passion. And it was very much a situation when everyone delivered their talk, you felt that energy in the room and the passion, and you felt really knee deep in what they were talking about. So it was just a great experience. And I think we've all been able to stay connected after that. And, you know, so what was your takeaway from doing something like that? And how much of an inspiration was being able to go to a place like MIT and doing a speech, kind of like that push forward for you to get out there and do more?
Well, I think what's interesting is, one of my mentors, I mean, there's so many people that have influenced me. One of the messages I heard, many years ago is that you become, the sum of the five people that you spend the most time with. Another thing that I've heard is that, don't underestimate the power of association. What do my friends have me reading? What do they have me doing? What do they have me becoming? And so to surround yourself with passionate people that have a mission to share a message, it can't help but help lift you up and pull you along in the vortex of it, I guess, if that makes sense. And that's who we were with. We were with passionate people that had a message to share.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right in the sense of you are who you put yourself around. If you're around extremely negative people, you're probably not going to be a beacon of sunlight after a long time. And then with both of us having, a past in addiction, if you are in addiction and you're desiring to get out of addiction, the last place you can be is in a room full of addicts. And I know for me, that challenged me in my process of trying to get to sobriety, because I did try to do the rooms and go to NA and AA and things like that. And unfortunately for me, as to not discredit those programs, because I know that they've helped millions of people throughout the world over decades, but it was just a place for me to find other people who wanted to stay in addiction, and, birds of a feather flock together. So I know one thing, Mark, is that our audience really wants to get to know you, understand who you are, what's inside you. And you shared that one of the defining challenges that shaped who you are today was that addiction and childhood trauma.
Yeah.
And that's a really heavy combination. I know for me personally, that's something I can really heavily associate with as well on both ends. But yet here you are helping others grow through their challenges. Can you take us back to that time in your life and talk about what struggle looked like for you and what started to pull you out of it?
Yeah. And I don't have any problem sharing, that part of my life, because I think it can be helpful and beneficial to other people to hear it. There is a huge stigma around addiction and alcoholism that people and abuse that people don't really want to talk about. And so it becomes this secret burden for so many people, and they become enslaved not only by the addiction, but by the fear of exposing it to the light so it can be healed. So my background, I was born by a single mother, who at the age of 21, thank heaven, did not abort me. Back in the early 60s, I was not a planned pregnancy. My father was not in her life at the time. When she became pregnant, he disappeared. And I don't really want to, make that a bad part of the story, because I did meet my father last year at the age of 61. So, that has healed, but I grew up not having the most stable environment to grow up in. My mother was an alcoholic. She did the best that she could, but all she could do was pass along the family disease to me. And I did, and I picked it up. There was emotional abuse, which was probably worse than the physical abuse. And so I became formed in that environment. Not only was I formed in that environment, but I also carried the genes of addiction, the physical genes, the medical part of it. And so by the time I was 12, 13 years old, I was already an addict in training. I didn't know it yet, but I was an addict in training. And it was the only life that I knew. And so basically, for the first part of my life, I lived what I was taught, and I lived my life with that problem that I was not aware of at that time in my life. And it was painful. It was very painful. And I know that you understand that. There were a lot of things looking back, in my earlier life, even into my young adult life, that, I don't like to talk about because it was painful for those people that were around me. But even more so for addicts, I want to share this with them, is that no one suffers greater than you do. No one is suffering greater than you do. Even though we feel like we're surviving, for me, and I'll share it for me, is that the substances that I was using, the alcohol and the other things that I was using, it made me feel good, but it wasn't really about the feeling good. It was to take away the pain that I was feeling. Alcohol and the drugs I was using was the solution to the problems that I was carrying inside my heart and my mind. It wasn't just about feeling good. It was about covering up that pain and recovery. The process of recovery is about healing what's going on inside without the substances.
Yeah, and it is such a good point that you make. And I think someone who doesn't understand addiction could very easily misunderstand what you're saying or take it the wrong way and make it sound like, oh, well, you're just saying that it's harder on the addict because you were an addict. But you have to look at it this way. If I'm an addict and I hurt you, I hurt you. right? So you feel that and you take that in. But guess what? As that addict, I carry the burden of hurting you, but that's not it, unfortunately. No, there's hundreds of Mark Dolans who I've come across and done that exact same thing to. So now I'm carrying the burden of having done that to hundreds of people. And so it is an exponential type of pain. And you're right. It's not that I did it initially because it was fun, but before long, I did it because I had to, and I was starting to make some really bad decisions that I wanted to hide from. And we're trained to do this, right? After my mom died, I would say probably more than anyone, my dad's mom and dad, so my grandparents on my dad's side, raised me. And I would go over there in the summer and get dropped off at 7:30, and my grandpa is sitting at the kitchen table, I don't know, playing with numbers and paying bills and stuff, but he has a bottle of Jack Daniels next to him and a beer. And my grandma at 11 o'clock, after she's done her morning routine, is sitting at the counter drinking a beer. And they're doing this all day. And then when they go to the grocery store, I go with them. Well, my grandfather's been drinking all day, but you don't at the time. That's my grandfather. He is not doing anything wrong. I'm 10 years old, and I don't really understand that he is driving around drunk. And it wasn't until one day where he went out to get pizza and he ran into the back of a postal vehicle. And it didn't really do damage to the postal vehicle, but it did to his car. And the guy, my grandfather, lucky for him that he was just one of those people who everybody knew him, everybody loved him. So he would talk to when the guy would drop off the mail, he'd be outside doing something in the garage. He'd go out drunk, talk to the mailman. He formed those relationships. So when the mailman got out of the car and recognized him, he said, "Okay, Slick," that's what everyone called him. "Okay, Slick, just get back in your car and get home." And so, it's one of those stories we giggle about. We come home and he tells the story, and, my grandma and my grandpa are laughing about it. And then when I get my first DUI and he's yelling at me, it snapped into my head. And I was just like, "Hey, asshole, where do you think I got this from? Like, how did you think this was just something I created myself? I watched you for the last 10 years of my life do this." And so, we are very often get these negative habits from what we see around us, and going through that recovery process isn't easy because it's not just, for me, it was with Oxycontin and heroin and physical addictive stuff, but alcohol is the same way. I mean, those are the things you can actually die in withdrawal over,
right.
That physical dependency. But for me, that wasn't the thing that I was like, I can't quit because I don't want to go into physical withdrawal. It was, I can't quit because I have to face all of those people and all of the mess that I've created. Right. And so one thing that really stood out to you, because my message is largely based around perseverance, is that you said for much of your life, it was pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and keep going. And that's really perseverance in its rawest form. It's not necessarily motivational, but it's the kind that happens when you just don't have any other choice in life. What did that look like in real time for you? What was, because, addiction isn't just this, it's this. Mm-hmm. It's a very weird path that we really wish we can control to just go like this. But like, what was that like? What was driving you to keep getting back up when so many people would have just stopped and continued doing what you were doing?
Well, it's interesting. And I've heard other people talk about this same experience that I'm going to share with you, but people that are survivors, people that survive trauma and, have things going on, there's demons, there's demons in there. And the best word to describe it is we become survivors. And a big part of my motivation, a big part of my work ethic, a big part of my drive is the desire to survive. it creates a very lonely experience, to be in your own head trying to survive, thinking that you're living in a hostile world where you have to protect yourself all the time. And that is the experience that I had as a young kid. And so I'm going to digress a little bit, because when you were talking about your grandfather, it reminded me of something about kids is when they see bad behaviors in their parents, they know it doesn't feel good. They know there's something wrong with it. And yet they love their parent, and they will adopt that behavior, or they will make excuses for it because they love their parents. And so when I grew up as a kid, I looked at what was going around me, which was chaotic, and I didn't say there's something wrong going on out there. I said there's something going wrong in here. There's something wrong with me because this just doesn't feel right. And so I had this battle to try and deal with what was going on me. And really what it was is that I just decided I was going to outwork everybody and survive. And so, I carried that into adulthood, Nick. And it's important for a lot of people to realize this, that have gone through, and find themselves living in chaos, is that I was not comfortable when things were going well with me. So I would have this situation where I would have a major, terrible experience. And so I would surrender, and I would give up, and I would start over. I would stop the bad behavior. I would make all the promises in the world, and I would start doing the right thing, and my life would turn around. Things would start going well for me. The lights were bright, the stars were out, everything was shining. And when things started going too well for me, I became uncomfortable. So what did I do? Is I cut my own legs off. I did something stupid to put myself back into crisis mode, so that I was under the gun, that I was under threat, whether it was, jail or the loss of a relationship or a marriage or something that I cared about. So I would put myself back into that chaotic situation because I knew how to survive chaos. I didn't know how to live with the peace that recovery brought. And people need to know that there is something so much farther along than just surviving the chaos and the addiction.
That's such a good message, and it speaks really strongly to me, because I think I talked to you a little bit at the beginning of the podcast before we got into it, and I didn't really divulge this, but I actually did a podcast last week where I went into it and said that, like, I think over the last year, one thing that I've really struggled with isn't the right word, but have come to find out, unfortunately, is that I am still an addict. And what happened is that I discovered that drug addiction was like a level 2 boss, which is a really crazy thing to think about, right, in the overall scheme of things, because it was so severe that it's like, wait, there's something else past this. But it was really, it's a performance addiction. Everything that I have ever done in my life, I cannot do at a normal, I can't have a hobby. If it's sports cards, which it happened to be in the past year, I dumped $50,000 into collecting sports cards. It is just a very compulsive. And I also found out, and I've known this for a while, that if I had to say the devil on my shoulder is that I am Ricky Bobby's dad. Okay. Have you ever seen Talladega Nights?
I'm familiar with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Ricky Bobby's dad is basically the type of person that you described, where things start going well enough, he looks around and he's like, what could I set on fire? Mm-hmm. How could I possibly? And I think that you have to sometimes do a lot of introspection. And I think part of that was I felt like I still carried a lot of burden of what I did to other people. And as I have, and this is not a brag, but as I've become successful, and I've been able to become successful at a faster rate than maybe some of the people who did bad things to, I carry guilt that I've never gotten rid of. So I think one of the best things. 10 years ago, I would have just like not been emotionally intelligent enough to really want to deal with it. But as I've gotten older, it's been like, no, you have to change. You have to recognize these things, and you can't just continue to beat yourself up. And that it is also a good reminder to me that we have to keep going, right? And we have to keep making improvements, and that life is not, you're not, hey, I beat drug addiction, I'm perfect, everything's going to be good from here on out. There's always going to be things that come up, and you just have to make sure not to fall back into those old patterns. And I think one of the biggest things that people need to hear now more than ever is when you see a lot of people and they talk about the stuff that they've been through, that's kind of the message. Here's what I've been through. And it is, even sometimes they'll say, hey, I go through stuff now still, but you never hear about what that stuff is. So the implication in the on-screen appearance is that, well, I'm doing great and everything's fine. And we know, because of what we've been through, that more likely than not, everything is a shit show underneath the surface, and everything is not great, but it's part of the messaging. Well, now more than ever, people really need to be able to see your wounds and scars and say, listen, I'm still actively going through this, but here's what I'm doing to help get through this. And one thing that you kept saying is surviving, surviving, surviving. When I worked at the mission for the 10 years after the homeless shelter, after I went through living there, I saw so many people, and it was almost encouraged, get yourself a little job, do what you can to stay out of trouble, and get yourself an apartment and just be happy there. And I was just like, man, what a real shitty way to have an existence. You know, we all have a special, unique gift in life. And basically you're being told by the people there that just like play it as safe as you possibly can so that you don't end up back in the position you're in now. And this is why I never made it ahead at this institution. I was like, no, that sounds terrible. We need to try to strive and not just survive. We need to shoot for the moon, and we get one shot at this thing we call life, and we have to try to make the best of it. Yeah. And so for me, it was fine. It was coming up with those microshifts and finding those little bits of, powerful knowledge in everyday circumstances, small, steady changes. For you said one of those things was a thing you kind of adapted, which is like 90 minutes to mastery, your daily routine. And I think that's super important. Everybody has to, again, we talked about this already once, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you don't have a good routine and you don't have a good setup, you're not setting yourself up for success. Tell me about that. What happens in those 90 minutes that really helps you build that consistent practice that changes your mindset, your habits, and maybe even your sense of identity to go through what you're going through on a daily basis? Okay.
Well, cut me off if I start going too long, because I'm really excited by where you went with this. Okay. So there were several things that you just shared there that really I want to sort of lead into the 90 minutes of mastery that I've developed. Is that, I do have a background, using 12-step programs for my recovery. One of the things that the literature says is, it makes the phrase, many of us are enthusiasts. So when you talk about being all or nothing, being an enthusiast, that's part of what addiction is. People are enthusiasts. And my wife says, Mark, I don't need to worry about you because I know you're going to change things up. You will stick with something for, 6 to 9 months, and then you're on to the next exciting thing, because there is that spark that we're after. There's something that is really special about addicts, and we don't realize it. And I learned it when I was in treatment. There was a great, Dr. Stone, got up on the board and he said, everybody thinks when they come here and they need help, that if they can just stop the drinking or if they can just stop the cocaine, they will be okay, which is a negative view of sobriety. What he said is the real problem is addiction. It's not the substance, because you can be addicted to sex, you can be addicted to gambling, you could be addicted to spending, you could be addicted to drama, you can be addicted to alcohol. Any substance can do it to you. He said the real issue is the disease of addiction. And then he said something I found fascinating. He said, Mark, you have a blessing. And everybody else in this room has a blessing, because people that don't have that internal, they just don't feel right. There's something missing. He said that's part of your addiction, that missing hole, that hole that we're trying to fill. He said what that does is it's the burr under the saddle. And that burr under the saddle, that feeling that you have, means that you continue to strive. And because that's a part of you, where you end up in life once you get on the road to recovery is way down the road. You're going to go long ways, because you're forced to grow every single day. Internally, you have this internal drive to do that. Now, contrast that with somebody that is not an addict, that can just go around in a little circle. They have their little thing. Every single day is exactly the same. They never need to change. They feel comfortable. There's nothing compelling them to grow. But addicts have that internal drive to grow, which leads me to the 90 minutes of mastery. It starts with, prayer and meditation, which is the 11-step and 12-step recovery groups, is to spend time in prayer and meditation. And for the last 14 years, every single day, I have spent about 90 minutes reading literature on recovery, reading things that are self-help in nature, reading scripture, investigating things that my heart and God put in front of me to grow. So I will spend time reading and absorbing that during that period of time. The other practice that I do is 3 pages of journaling every single day. I write out 3 pages by hand every day. And sometimes it's a problem I'm dealing with. Sometimes it's a feeling. Sometimes it's gratitude. But it's me talking with the Holy Spirit. And what has happened with that 90 minutes a day is that I have a relationship with myself, and I have a relationship with my Creator that is the foundation for every single thing that I do in my life. It's the anchor that takes care of me. It's magic. Now, I would share, you don't need to start with 90 minutes. It's pretty hard for people to meditate for 10 minutes, or to pray for 10 minutes. It's really hard. So you start small and you build up with it. I've been involved with recovery, not sober the entire time, but involved with recovery for over 30 years. And the practice gets better.
Yeah, and it is one of those things where you can't stop it, right? I think that's where a lot of people mess up. And admittedly, I can raise my hand a little bit and say that I slowed down on some of the things that kept me off of drugs because I felt comfortable, and getting complacent was what allowed that the real big demon in me, which is the performance addiction, to come out and say, well, if it ain't going to be this, it's going to be that.
Yeah.
And, it's good to be able to recognize that about yourself. But ultimately, above and beyond all things, we all have to have that something that grounds us. We have to have something. And look, I have the Calm app on my phone. And so I try to have a morning routine where I do a little ab exercise, or I pick an area of my body that I'm like, I would like to, work on. And so I do that. And then I go upstairs, and I'm on about 10 minutes right now, because I have just been disposed to so many things that catch my attention that I have a very short attention span. And I do believe it's something you can build on, but right now my attention span is about 10 minutes before I start to get like, okay, what's the next thing? But you find yourself in peace. Right before this podcast at 8 a.m. on Mondays, I have a sitting appointment with a psychiatrist where I don't even go in, and it's just whatever I'm thinking about or going through, I just spill it out. Like, that is part of my routine. Every Monday I get to just dump whatever's been going on, and it's awesome to do it. And I'm lucky that I was able to get in like a first thing in the morning on Monday's slot, because now my whole week gets to start off where I'm basically I'm flushing the trash out of my system from the last 7 days. And I know it's going to refill, but it at least, allows me to help myself develop into a better person. And you mentioned this in your questionnaire for the podcast, that one of the topics and some of the topics you're most passionate about are things like personal development, leadership, communication. A lot of times wanting to do those things comes from positions of pain. These are things we didn't have growing up, or when we were going through the tough times we were going through. These are the things that we're lacking. They often come from pain, from learning how to connect, how to grow, how to lead ourselves before we lead other people. And I think that's a really great example. I think too many people try to cart before the horse and get into it. And I want to be a leader. And you're like, buddy, your train ran off the tracks 10 years ago and no one told you. So what have you learned about leadership through your own journey? And what do you think most people misunderstand about it?
Well, there's I'm thinking back about 35 years ago, after I cleaned up my act and got sober the first time, and I met, a really wonderful man. His name was Tim Wood. He became my mentor. He was a real estate guy. And I remember asking him one day, I said, Tim, how do you become a leader? Where do you go to learn how to become a leader? And he sort of blew me off a little bit. He said, well, I hang around Mike Ferry and I hang around Dick Farrell, which were people that were leaders in the industry. He was part of mastermind groups with these people. He says, I just hang around people like that, which goes back to that power of association that we talked to at the beginning. And so I sort of walked away, sort of scratching my head. Well, that really wasn't helpful. And the next day he came back to me and he said, I've got a bunch of, tapes and audio recordings in my office. Feel free to borrow them anytime, but just make sure you put them back. So he was a really good mentor for me. But, fast forward about another week, I think I was going to be celebrating my second sobriety anniversary a following week. And I had a family member, well, I'll be really blunt about it. The man that was married to my mother had cheated on her, and he was in recovery and she was in recovery, and I was getting ready to celebrate my second birthday. And, the question came up, do I invite them both? Do I invite them both? And so I was wrestling with that, with that thought in my mind, and this may seem like it's really off topic, but, here I am driving down the road, wrestling with, am I going to invite Jim, to come to this celebration of my second year of recovery? And I felt the impulse, and I picked up my brand new cell phone. It was one of those Motorola flip phones that nobody has ever seen, probably listening to this. And I picked up the phone. I said, hey, Jim, this is Mark. Hey, I'm celebrating my second year of recovery on Saturday night at the meeting. And I know, with the things that are going on with the family, that you might feel uncomfortable, but I wanted to make sure that you knew that you were welcome to attend, because you've been an integral part of my recovery, and it's only appropriate that you would be there. So if you're wondering if you're invited, you are invited, and hope to see you then. And I hung up the phone. And I asked myself, I said, who the hell does that? Who the hell does that? And the answer is that's what leaders do. That's what leaders do. They don't look for permission. They evaluate and they make a decision and they take action and move forward. See, people were watching me. People were listening to me. People were competing with me. People were criticizing the things that I was doing. And that's what happens with leaders. I thought that I needed to have awards on the wall to be a leader. I thought I needed to have everyone's, you're doing great, Mark. That's great. We would like to have that happen, but that's not what leadership is. So my favorite quote on leadership is this. It's leadership is not a trumpet call to self-importance. It's the opportunity to serve. And whatever you're doing in your life with your podcast and helping others, you're serving other people. That's what leadership is. That's what leadership is.
Yeah. And I think and it's going to sound kind of contrary to what you said, but I don't think you raise your hand and say, I'm a leader.
No.
I think you can recognize it when the situations happen, but it's not something you do beforehand. It's something you're able to look at afterwards. And I think most of the time, a leader is someone who other people kind of elevate up because they're, this is a situation we're going through. Well, Mark has a really good perspective on this. And so, and it isn't always you're a leader of everything. It's just you're a leader of the thing that you know about, And one thing that I can tell you that Mark knows a lot about is about how easy the world of real estate is. I mean, anybody, it's so easy. Anybody can get into it. It's not complicated at all. But it is a big misconception. And I know a lot of your background up to this point. Yes, you're in stuff like, leadership development, people development, things like that. But you have a background in real estate. Yeah. I get where you're coming from as a business owner, that just because what you see isn't always the whole truth of it. It's just what you see. So you want to clear up what you think people get wrong about real estate and what you think people get wrong about success, but maybe not even just real estate in life.
Okay. Well, and, I have been a real estate agent since I was 21 years old. So that is now 42 years. I started out as a young kid with an addiction background and a trauma background. I had very few skills. I was not voted the most likely to succeed. Clearly I was displaying some of my problems when I got into real estate, but I was motivated by the money. And I think that's one of the misconceptions that people have about real estate is, real estate promises you unlimited freedom. It also promises you unlimited income, but it doesn't offer you both at the same time. I think that's an important distinction for people that are thinking about real estate as a career, is that, there's so much money and there's so much freedom. Well, you can't have both, okay? And so I sort of grew up in the industry. I grew up as a salesperson, starting from the very beginning. And I always tell people that being successful in real estate is a metaphor for life, because all of the skills that are required to be a great real estate salesperson are the same skills that make you successful in life. For example, being a good listener, being an excellent communicator, delaying gratification, having patience. You don't get paid until the deal is done. You do all of your work in the very beginning before you ever get paid. And sometimes you can do all of the work, and if the deal doesn't close, you don't get paid. It takes a very strong sense of a strong sense of character to be able to work for free on the hope that you're going to get paid. I think probably the last thing that happens is that a lot of people will say, well, that's a lot of money to pay somebody $10, $15, $20, $30, $50,000 for selling my home, and they've only worked on the deal for 60 days. $60,000 is a lot more money than some people make in an entire year. So from that perspective, it seems like it is completely out of line. And that's why I think the industry gets such a bad rap. One is that the fees are so high, but people don't realize what real estate salespeople are going through in order to earn that kind of money. Number one, they're working without getting paid on a lot of the deals that they work on. The second is that there's a lot of expense to it. And you're not really being paid for the 60 days that your agent works for you. You're paying them for the work that they've done over the last 5, 10, 15, 20, or 42 years. The experience and the expertise that they bring to that transaction, you might have that relationship for 60 days, but you're getting the benefit of 42 years of investment.
It's a really good way to look at it. And that's how anybody in business, especially for themselves, has to sell themselves, right? Like,
right.
As a marketing company, you're not paying me to do your marketing necessarily. You're paying me for the 10 years of mistakes I made on other people's dimes so I don't make them on yours, amongst the knowledge that we gather along the way as well. So it is, people, and I tend to think that oftentimes business owners tend to get it a little bit more because they're in it on a day-to-day basis and they see the same kind of responses and things like that. But it's always just fascinating. And then I'm also sure that in the cost that they see, I'm sure the agent doesn't get every penny of that because they're usually working for a brokerage. And then, like you've said, they've driven around. This might be the 17th house that they've looked at, and they've taken 4 other couples to look at 17 houses, and the intangible time of missing family time. And I know when we were buying a house, we encouraged, hey, you got your kid and bring him with you. We have a 7-year-old or 6-year-old at the time. They can run around together, and it made the experience a little bit better for the salesperson. But yeah, I hear you completely on that. As we wrap up here, you shared something simple but powerful in your responses, that what keeps you grounded today is routine, discipline, and consistency. It's a reminder that success isn't built in the breakthroughs. It's built in the boring moments that stack up over time. If someone listening right now feels stuck, if they're carrying their own version of trauma, addiction, or even burnout, what is one micro shift they could start with today to start to get out of that mentality?
One micro shift. Ask for help. Ask for help. The whole purpose of me coaching is to provide help to people that need help in their growth. The purpose for a mentor is to help somebody make the breakthroughs and help them move forward in their career. The purpose of any addiction counselor is to help provide you with the tools and the information to change your life. So if there's one micro shift, it's don't do it alone. Ask for help.
I think that's, and I'm going to say something that might be offensive to you, and I apologize. I think it is important coming from someone in your demographic, because you are still in that demographic, I think, where, especially as a male, it wasn't always comfortable to ask for help. You just suck it up and deal with it. And, that really was, and my father's a little older than you. He's 71. You remind me a lot of him, and that's a compliment, right? That's not an insult at all. My dad and I have a great relationship despite whatever we've gone through. But I know that I had to watch him suffer in a lot of silence, because it was a lot in that time that a man just did what he had to do and he put his nose down. And you find way too many people who just ended up living less lives, I guess, is a good way to put it. So I think it's an important message that, like, yes, we absolutely should raise our hands. Why in the world? Again, I said earlier in the podcast, we're all on this earth for such a little bit of time. I mean, we need to make the best use of it as we possibly can, and curbing the time it takes to get through something we're going through only makes sense. Mark, listen, I really thank you for being here and sharing your story. What I love about you is that you are proof of what we talk about on this show every week. Perseverance isn't about pushing harder. It's about staying consistent through the chaos. To everyone listening, where can they find you and connect with you?
Well, I appreciate you asking. So if you're into real estate, I do have a podcast. It's called Time Tested Mastery, Life Lessons Sell. So my podcast talks about personal development things as well. And it is very much oriented to salespeople and people that are in the real estate business. You can also find me at timetestedmastery.com or email me at timetestedmastery@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from anybody that I might be able to provide a little bit of a nudge in the right direction.
Well, awesome. And for us, you can find me on TikTok and Instagram at Nick from CWE, on YouTube at The Microshift, online at themicroshift.com, LinkedIn at Nicholas Vlinchak. I don't know who wants to find me on LinkedIn, but if you want to, you can find me. I'm not going to give you my home address. That's the only other place I'm at, so we'll leave that one up to a mystery. But until next time, remember, transformation doesn't come from massive overhauls. It comes from Microshift, those small human moments that can change everything. Thanks for tuning in to the Microshift Project Podcast. And remember, keep fucking going.